All right, so tonight our advocacy talk session is connecting with your child, exploring attachment styles. And we brought Sarah Zucca tonight on to do this presentation. And Sarah, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. So I'm not the most tech savvy. So with that said, I'm going to do my best to share my PowerPoint, and then halfway I'll have to exit out of it so that we can answer any questions or anything like that. So I apologize if I'm fumbling around with tech. I'm sure everyone has experienced that. So if that's okay, I'm going to share the PowerPoint because I have more information about myself, and we'll just start from there. Oh, and I think you have to allow me to share my screen.
There we go. Forgot to do that earlier.
Okay. And I know I have to share sound and optimize. Okay. And yep. All right. So hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be talking about connecting with your child with ASD and looking at attachment styles. I am Sarah Zucca, and in the next slide I'm going to share a little bit more about who I am. All right. I went too far, sorry. In our presentation, I will be using the identity person first language, saying the autistic community or my autistic son, and that is a shift away from person first language. And I've been listening to the autistic community, and that is what they are advocating for. And so until my child is able to communicate his wishes and needs of how I express his autism, that's how I will be communicating about autism and the autistic brain or the autistic relationship. Okay, so attachment is all about relationships, and I figured I couldn't do a training without sharing a little bit about myself and who I am. So I am the co-owner of Grounded Roots Counseling Service, and we're located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I am an attachment-focused trauma therapist, so that's my first specialty. I utilize a technique called EMDR. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Prince Harry helped bring us onto the map, I think last spring. But for those that have not heard what EMDR is it intensifies or strengthens any positive memories or networks we have in our brain. And it also desensitizes, I describe it as any yucky or stuck or negative trauma memories that are still in our brain or body or memory. I am also the mom to my 9-year-old autistic son, Andrew, and I will be sharing a lot about our relationship in this presentation because I know when I attend trainings, I learn best from real life examples. And so I am going to, be sharing just a little bit about my relationship with both boys, really, but really with Andrew. And I have a 7-year-old son who has ADHD. And so because of them, I have gone down lots of different rabbit holes learning about the neurodiverse brain and body and how they process information and the best ways that I can support them and love them and connect with them. And so as I was attending my trauma trainings and trying to learn more about my boys, I always had epiphanies walking away going, wow, these two blend so nicely. The trauma brain and the neurodiverse brain, they really look very similar. Their origins are very different and the treatments are different. And so I love that I get to talk tonight about both of my passions, and I'm thankful that all of you decided to join me on a Thursday rainy night. I also later on the presentation will be talking about the concept of regulation and co-regulation. And so of course I had to include pictures of things that I enjoy doing that help calm my nervous system and also bring me great joy. So in the top picture I have our puppy dog, who was a rescue girl that we got about 10 or 11 years ago. And we went on our own attachment journey with her with all the things that she needed to feel safe and secure with us. And then our 2 kitties are also up in that corner. And then I love the beach. The beach is the place where my mind stops and I feel calm and centered. And I love running on the beach. It is my absolute favorite. So I just wanted to share, a little bit more about me. And then I also, oftentimes when I'm working with parents and we're looking at attachment wounds, or we're looking at ways they can connect with their child, they often think, oh my gosh, am I messing up? And so I just want to, affirm whether you are a parent or you're a provider, the fact that you're willing to learn more and explore more says a lot. And so that's part of this journey I'm learning, is that I will never have all the answers and I will never know everything. And so my job is just to be curious and explore and every day show up. So tonight I'm hoping we can do an overview of attachment theory. It was originally designed for neurotypical children because at that time of it being studied, autism was still fairly new. And so I do think that to have that foundational understanding of attachment theory will be helpful. And then I do obviously want to talk about how it looks different in the autism spectrum disorder and your connection with your child or when you're working with families. And then I also want, obviously come here and when we talk about attachment, anxiety may be raised, but I want to give you some pointers and things that I've learned along the way of ways to improve that attachment, because attachment is fluid. It can change, it can evolve, it can strengthen, it can also weaken. And so I want to give you those strategies that will help strengthen that attachment. And then at the end, anyone who will attend trainings with me will probably hear the common theme of taking care of ourselves will always help our families. And even if you're a provider, taking care of yourself will always help anything you're doing. So I will give us some resources of that. When I was doing this presentation, I didn't have this in first. And then I realized that similar to when I'm working with my clients, anytime we talk about attachment and anything that's connected to trauma, sometimes things can get activated for us. So I really just want everyone to know this presentation, it cannot substitute for therapy. It is really just for educational purposes only. And that if that information is activating for you today, again, at the end, I'll have some strategies and also, some resources that you can take away. And I can't delve into personal or client information. This can't be viewed kind of as a therapy session, but I am here to offer a lot of different resources. And one of them is What Happened to You? It's by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, and it is my go-to book. I have given it out to, I think, or recommended for like 8 or 9 of my clients, and not one has come back and said they hated it. They, front to cover, loved it. So that is one that I highly recommend. Okay, so this is my son, Andrew. And like I said, I love learning from real life examples, and our attachment journey has not been smooth. It has not been easy. We've gone through peaks and valleys and turns and all those things. And so upon, reflecting on this presentation, I thought that it would be helpful just to be honest and share, where we've come from and where we're hopefully going. And so the first picture is, Andrew, I think he was probably less than 1, maybe around 12 months. And I found that the infant to 3 years, we really were connected and bonded. And this is not to say that attachment parenting is the only way to have secure attachments, but that was just something that came natural. I'm a very touchy-feely mom, so I didn't mind co-sleeping or baby wearing or any of those things. And one of the things that I realized with Andrew when he was first a baby is that he cried a lot. Cried. And so we had the physio balls and we bounced and bounced, and we had all the contraptions that everyone tells you to get at your baby shower. And he refused all of them. He did not go in the baby swing. He did not go in any of that. He just wanted to be held. And I remember crying at the pediatrician office around 6 to 8 weeks. Because I had heard other moms share like, oh, maternity leave, it was so boring, and I got all this done, and and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? Like, my child he cries and he seems uncomfortable. And so when I shared with the pediatrician, I was just worrying I was doing something wrong, and why was he so, uncomfortable? She really soothed me, which then gave me the confidence to just continue doing what I was doing. But she said, that, your baby is distressed and you are finding ways to comfort him. And so it sounds like you're doing it correctly. And so I thought, okay, so that's okay that my baby is more fussy and that he's crying. And I found ways that work for me and work for him and are soothing. And so I continued that. And now looking back that I know now that I know he's autistic, I think, oh my gosh, the world was just so sensory overwhelming for him that closeness and being baby worn and all of that, that's what his nervous system needed. And so I'm thankful that that worked for our family. And I think that helped our bond. Then we got our diagnosis at age 3 and 3 months, and our world changed, even though he always had autism. That was the same time period that he was starting to go out into the world for preschool, and the social skills were at age 18 months, every kid is doing parallel play and there's not much joint interaction. And so around 3 is when that starts to shift. And so we started to notice a change from neurotypical peers and our son. We got our diagnosis, and looking back, I realized for those probably 4 years until he went, or I guess 3 or 4 years till he went to kindergarten, I became very dysregulated. I didn't know how to help him. I was suddenly thrust into a world. I didn't know a single parent or anyone who had an autistic child. I had a couple special ed teacher friends that I leaned on, and they kind of plugged me in, but I felt very isolated and alone, and like I had no idea how to help my child. And I can remember one memory of before our diagnosis, one of the early intervention people came in and they wanted us to do this birthday party play, pretend imagination thing. And he lost it and he flipped out and he did not want anything to do with it. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? How did did I not play with him correctly? Did I not do any of these things? And so I was really trying to push him to do all these, neurotypical things. And that's what we're supposed to do with autism. And I was the one taking him to a lot of his appointments since I work part-time. And looking back, I realized he really did not like me, and I was not having enjoyment with him. I was counting his words, and I was looking at all the things he couldn't do, and running to speech and OT and trying to find anything I could on autism. And it was slowly over time that I found a community, really felt much more confident. We had the most amazing providers, but that took a long time. And then COVID hit. And what should have really dysregulated our family system, I know it dysregulated a lot of family systems, really brought us together. And I remember when I realized that, okay, we're really going to do school from home. I went to Andrew and I said to him, Mommy has you. I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to make this as easy as possible. And I did. I believe we did. We figured out the sensory things he needed, the visual things he needed. I learned more about how his brain was processing information, and I got a front row seat of how he was struggling in school. And so that allowed me to, I think, advocate for him better, and which then I think helped him realize, wow, I can trust Mommy. Like she's looking out for me and she's got me. And then we also became our children's playmates. And so instead of trying to force him to do certain play that, providers were trying, and I'm not knocking like that's fine. But as his mom, I needed to be enjoying him for us to be attached. And so we did, I just did a lot more child-led play, and we had fun, and we did fire pits, and we were outside. And I started to see him coming back around to wanting Mommy to put him to bed or read a story. For the longest time, I would walk in his room and he would tell me to get out. And as a therapist and emotional person, that was really hard. And I think the defining moment where I realized, okay, our attachment is here, is when he, this just happened, I think like 6 months ago, his hands were really raw and bleeding and cracked. And I noticed, I said, oh my goodness, Andrew, Mommy would really like to try and help make that feel better. But yeah, I know you don't like lotion. So I acknowledged his sensory thing that he doesn't like, and worked with him very slowly to have him smell the lotion to make sure that it wasn't going to be something, sensory that activated him. And then I put the lotion on me so he could feel it. And then he was, I think, in a lot of pain. He allowed me to use, the lotion. And now, he'll come up to me and he'll ask for me to put on lotion. And I think that I know it seems something like really small, but anyone who knows Andrew knows that he hates sunscreen, he hates lotion. And that was a huge, milestone for us to be able to do that. So just sharing my personal story, I hope as we're talking, you hear some of those themes of being connected and seeing your child and also soothing them and regulating yourself in order to connect with your child. So I wanted to just briefly go over the history of attachment. It started in the 30s with John Bowlby, and he stated that attachment theory is a bond that will develop in the first 6 months of a child's life if the caregiver is appropriately responsive. And then he also believed that it served two purposes, that it was protecting the vulnerable from potential threat, and it also is to help a child regulate emotions following a threatening or harmful event. And unfortunately for those moms on here, moms get the bad rap and the blame for attachment. Everyone, kind of points to that the attachment to the mom is the strongest, but I can attest as a trauma therapist that attachment to any healthy adult is very much important. And so dads, you are needed, and providers, you're needed as well in attachment. And then it is biological. There is an attachment gene. It's things that, the baby does that gets the response from the caregiver and vice versa. And I think this will be unique of how it differs a little bit with autism. And then you see this in all species, primates and human cultures. So this is evolutionary, it's for survival. Mary Ainsworth was another big significant contributor in attachment theory. And she created the strange situation experiment, where it started around 12 to 18 months, and it has a child, a mother, and a stranger, and they go through a series of separations and reunifications, and they measured how the child responded when the mom was gone, to how the mom, when she returned, and when the stranger was there. There are 4 types of attachment styles. I will, frequently hear from my clients like, oh, that person's attached, but it depends on what style of attachment they are. And so there's a secure attachment, there's an insecure avoidant, and there's an insecure anxious, and then there's a disorganized attachment style. And again, the next couple of slides are really about neurotypical children. And so when I'm talking, especially when I was researching this and seeing like secure attachment, I'm going, oh my goodness, like right here, ability to regulate difficult emotions and seeks comfort with a caregiver. If you are the parent of an autistic child, you know that they have difficulty regulating their emotions. And so I will get into kind of how autism is different. So just hold that in mind. And then, yeah, so with that, there could be, medical or physical reasons that the child is also not easily soothed. So in the population, general population, it's around 50 to 60 or 63%. Lots of different studies had different things. And it's a warm and loving bond between parent and child. And so the parent provides a sense of safety and security, regulates emotions when the child is feeling distressed. It also, I think this is really key, it offers a secure base from which to explore. So the caregiver is not only looking for danger, but allowing the child to move and to explore and not have to be hovering and right there. The parent is emotionally available. And then what they find with the child is that they're active and demonstrate confidence, they can build long-term relationships, and that they are easily reassured, and that they do discriminate between their caregiver or their mom or dad and a stranger. And then there are, we'll get into it more, but there are overlaps between autism and attachment difficulties, which I'm going to go into in the next couple slides. So the insecure avoidant attachment style, this is a parent that is not responsive and perhaps even neglectful of basic needs or nurturance or soothing of any kind. The caregiver is not attuned or connected. And so they may be trying, but they, I guess, for example, like sometimes if a child does not like to be held or swaddled or anything like that, and the parent continues to do it and the child's like trying to move away, that would be one where the child or the caregiver is not attuned or connected. The caregiver seems angry in general. And I thought this was, interesting that the caregiver is attributing wrong motivation to the baby. And so an example would be, a caregiver thinking, oh my gosh, this baby is just crying to make my life miserable or to spite me, versus babies cry and they should cry. They should, because that alerts, the person who can do something that they need help. and they need something, and that they're wanting to be picked up. And so the child becomes indifferent to the caregiver. They learn to shut down whatever emotional needs they have, and they learn to rely on themselves. They grow up feeling unloved and insecure, and they often struggle with expressing needs and wants. And that I also find this very fascinating, that these infants, when they measure their brain and their cortisol and things going through their body, they have the same high level as like a secure attached child who's distressed and crying and asking for emotional support. And they still have all of that coursing through their bodies, but they've learned to shut it off. They've learned to not express it. And so even though the child looks like it's content and on their own or not making a fuss, they've almost learned to not be expressing or feeling those emotions. The third type is insecure anxious. And so the caregiver could be over-involved, they could be inconsistent or unavailable at times. So kind of not really knowing what parent, is this parent going to be connected with me this time, and then the next time angry at me for crying, and that they, oftentimes don't allow the child to develop autonomy or self-actualization, meaning that they don't let the child explore the world without hovering and being on top of them and fearful. And oftentimes the caregiver's own mental health takes center stage. And so the caregiver may have anxiety, OCD, depression, PTSD. And so that is really like the child is having to, kind of adjust their emotional needs because the caregiver isn't as emotionally available. And so these children typically have anxiety of whether their caregiver is going to be able to meet their needs. Their emotions are really intense. They often are clingy. And the child is very much more interested in the caregiver's behavior and moods versus exploring their world. In adulthood, we find that these individuals are often withdrawn or unassertive, have poor interpersonal skills. They may even be emotionally dependent in adulthood. And they often constantly seek approval from, caregivers and needing, or their loved ones and needing that reassurance. This is where I spend most of my day working with individuals with a disorganized attachment style. When you have trauma, then you have both. You have both anxious and avoidant attachment styles. And this usually shows in when there is abuse. And it doesn't have to be like the abuse maybe of physical abuse or sexual abuse, but if our caregiver had a substance use disorder and they weren't available, this might show up as a disorganized attachment style. And again, this caregiver may have their own form of trauma that is untreated and really taking the forefront versus being connected and regulated with their child. There is no attempt to repair with the child. So as I'm talking, I'll give examples of how, like, we all misstep, we all miss a tune. I have yelled at my children, and the key is really trying to repair any of those wounds or missteps. They often, and then I guess, children, they need to dissociate, and how I describe that is just basically detaching your brain and body from each other, needing to survive. And so I can't be connected to my body because it's feeling lots of uncomfortable things. And so I'm going to float away or be somewhere else. And that can be done even as, infants. Dissociation can happen. And oftentimes these children display intense anger and rage. And what was supposed to be safety is now the source of alarm and danger. And another way of looking at it is, as the parents were supposed to be a source of comfort, they are now a source of terror. Okay. So when I was doing this presentation as a parent with an autistic child, this slide really got me angry. And then at the end, of course, it would be a parent with a child with autism to actually get it right. So Kaner in the 40s, he was studying these families from an affluent, academic-oriented, white middle-class area. And previous to this, autism was described as emotionally disturbed, psychotic, or schizophrenic. And he was the first person really to start noticing these symptoms that were different than maybe neurotypical children. And so he started studying them. And he was the one that observed that the parents with these children were often cold or not engaged. And so he coined the term refrigerator moms. And this set off a series of blaming moms for their children having autism. And a lot of guilt and shame originated from that. And then in the 40s through 70s, a man named Bruno Bettelheim became like the guru for any person who had a kid with autism. And he stated that it was an emotional disorder that developed in some children because of psychological harm brought on by mothering. And so he perpetuated that need to remove the child with autism. I think, he was quoted as saying like, remove the mom and remove the autism or something like that. And in the 60s, thankfully, Bernard Rimland published a book called Infantile Autism, the Syndrome and Its Implications for a Neurotheory of Behavior. And he had a child himself with autism. And instead of blaming the parents, he thought, maybe there's a biological reason that my child has, the symptoms that they have. And this started the movement of looking for the neurobiological reasons that a child could have autism. And thankfully, other parents got wind of this and they really pushed for those research studies. And it was the thought that parents cause autism was repeatedly challenged and eventually rejected, as we know. And he was the first person to provide that solid argument that autism is a biological condition. And so I think he should be celebrated with that. Okay, so now to just get into how autism and attachment looks different, because again, I know when I was going through that, I'm thinking, well, my child isn't easily soothed. He doesn't always seek me out for reassurance in the same way that maybe a neurotypical kid is. And so when you also look at trauma and attachment, autism looks very much like an attachment disorder, and children that have reactive attachment disorder often sometimes are misdiagnosed with autism, and the root origin of their symptoms, and while they might check off those things, it's originating in trauma. And so their brain is showing the same symptoms, but the origin and the way it's wired is different, and the treatment needs to be different. So professionals, it is so important to do that thorough assessment and intake to know, is this attachment and trauma-based for these symptoms, or is this autism? And not to say that extensive trauma and autism can't go together, because they can. Our children with autism are at a higher rate of having abuse and neglect, and so they can go together, but it's sometimes hard to tease out. And then, so one of the things with joint attention, when you're thinking about attachment and then autism, is that, joint attention is something that is really hard, especially in the early stages with autism, and perhaps that can shift and evolve. But research has shown that a child with autism spends way less time in joint attention than compared to neurotypical. They spend about 30% of their time in joint attention versus neurotypical, it's about 76. And a child with Down syndrome, it's about 78. And joint attention is just sharing the other person's world. They, like the child walking down the street and saying, look, mom, there's, an airplane, is trying to enter the adult parents' world and having them join in. So when, a child's playing and you take a car, they're aware of you and you're playing, maybe side by side, but they know you're there. And so children with autism spend way less time using joint attention. Eye contact. Oftentimes, if you are holding a neurotypical baby, they are just loving on you with their eyes. They are tracking you. They are looking at you. It sends endorphins to the caregiver to attach to their parent. And I remember saying to my husband when Andrew was, I think, like a week old, or I guess it would have been about 4 weeks, because when his eyes, were tracking and alert, he just seems to be staring off. He's not staring at me. And so even that young, I could tell Andrew, his eye contact was different. And a lot of autistic people will say they don't get the same information, which is true. Their brain's not picking up that same information we all get by making eye contact or looking at a person's face. And sometimes I've even heard them describe it as it burns their eyes to look at someone else's eyes. And so, just knowing how that might look different with attachment. Sensory needs. I shared that in the beginning part about how, a child may not be regulated if their sensory system is overloaded, and attachment is about regulation. And so just because your child or baby is distressed and you're attempting to soothe, and it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Theory of mind is that ability to know that someone else has different thoughts and feelings than our own. And autistic individuals do have a deficit at times with theory of mind. And so a baby who, a baby or a toddler is able to know, okay, at some point, my parent is different than me, and that they can still be here and have their own thoughts and feelings, where that might be a little bit more difficult for a child with autism. And I kind of touched on that emotional regulation, that children with autism have a very difficult time regulating their emotions, and I'll get into maybe more reasons as to why that is. Shared imagination, when you're, doing play, imaginative play, you do feel connected to your child. You're part of their world, they're part of yours. And so children with autism struggle with that shared imagination. Deficits in social communication, both verbal and nonverbal. Again, when you think about that infant who's cooing and connecting with their parent, Andrew was my first child, and I didn't know what cooing was. And so I didn't realize he was not cooing or getting my attention in that way. And I had not heard that sound until my youngest son cooed. And there was something biological that went in my head and body when I heard that sound, and it was the sweetest sound. And so sometimes kids with autism may not do those things, or may not seek out, hey, I'm needing this, mommy. And so that can impact attachment. Atypical play. This is something typically not seen in neurotypical children. This might be something like hand flapping or unusual body movements. And so with attachment, and you're kind of studying that, it's not going to look the same way when a 12 to 18-month-old is separated from their mom. They're going to have this big reaction. And then when the caregiver comes back in, they're going to open their arms and they're going to ask to be picked up, and they're going to crawl over to them, where, I'll get into it a little bit later, but a child with autism may display it in a different way. Inflexibility and rigidity, stuck thinking. People with autism oftentimes, or anyone with neurodiversity, engages and has maybe some inflexibility or rigidity. And so only wanting things done a certain way, or not having that adaptability and flexibility. Okay. So this is Autism and Research, when I was looking into it, it is very under-researched. They didn't really start again until the 80s. A lot of this is probably because of the damage created with the refrigerator mom notion, that researchers were probably scared to restart that and take a look at autism and attachment. The research does show that children with autism can form secure attachments about 50% of the time, was the average that I was finding. And it was originally believed that they couldn't, that children with autism didn't form at all any secure attachment. And so this was really awesome to see that it's not that far off from the neurotypical population, and that they can form secure attachments. And then, like I shared, that their ways of showing attachment is different from neurotypical children. The literature with autism is also confusing, because most of the studies used older children, like around 4 to 6, probably because of the language deficits. And so some researchers kind of say you can't use the strange person situation, and perhaps hopefully over time research gets better in this area to identify what strengthens that bond and what it looks like with children when having autism. Children with autism are at a higher risk of developing insecure attachments, mainly because of the lack of communication, social interactions, as I was giving those examples of maybe how a neurotypical child will display their affection and what it produces in the caregiver. And then they also, may experience more contact resistant, like I shared, if they have sensory needs. And key features that research found that impacted caregivers' ability to have secure attachments with their child was the concept of intuition, sensitivity, and being resolved with the diagnosis. So insightfulness is that ability to see things from your child's point of view, accepting of the child's challenging behavior, and open to new communication about the child. And this is a concept that I'm loving and is, kind of making its headway around in the treatments with autism, is presuming a child's competence. So presuming that they can do things and that we just need to change our strategies versus forcing them to fit into a neurotypical world. And so I wanted to give an example that happened to us recently where Andrew was invited to one of his first birthday parties with his classmates. And I knew, like, coming out of COVID, and he really, hasn't been in an unstructured environment with peers, I asked the family that I could attend, and they were so gracious in allowing me to stay. And as we're working, that's like a woodworking birthday party. And the second it got really noisy, because it's, I think 18 third graders and at a birthday party, and they're all excited on a Friday night. And then there also was like blow dryers to do that. And so I was kind of in the back, giving him some independence, seeing how he's doing and connecting with his peers. And the second the noise went up in decibels, my mommy senses went on, and I quickly attended to him and saw he was starting to dysregulate. So I moved closer to him. I first tried to cover his ears just to see if that would help, and I could sense he was dysregulating more. So we just went outside and we took a walk, and I was able, once he was a little bit more regulated, to say oh, that was so loud in there, and just acknowledge how painful, that was. And he did, he said something so beautiful. He shared, "My ears are burning." And that was the first time I've ever heard him describe that what that sensory input is to his ears. And so, we were able just to kind of, once he was more regulated, go back in. And we did go back in and out, and the kids were super understanding. And I'm so thankful that I knew his sensory need, and I knew that we had strategies to sit through it, because I could have had the insight of looking at him and being like, he's dysregulated, we have to leave and we have to go. And I'm so glad I didn't, because on the car ride home, even though, his classmates probably thought he didn't have fun, the kid's birthday party, he just was at times dysregulated. But I said, "Hey buddy, what did you think about, that party?" And I wasn't really sure what he was going to say. And he said, "It was so much fun." And when we came in the house, he shared with his brother and his dad what an amazing night he had. And so had I not known those sensory triggers and not known how to intervene, I would have misinterpreted perhaps and said, "Hey, let's go." Or if I wasn't regulated, I wouldn't have been able to stay, connected and resourceful for him, and an anchor in that world that was very chaotic. So sensitivity, that the caregiver is emotionally attuned, accepting, nurturing, and that they respond appropriately and quickly. So you're looking for the cues your child is sending for safety, connection, basic need. You're interpreting them correctly and respond appropriately and quickly. And then, a sensitive caretaker or caregiver is just acknowledging the feelings. So you're saying "Oh, you're very angry right now. You did not like that when we had to put on sunscreen." Oftentimes, I know I'm guilty of this, that I will go to that logic part of my brain of, well, we're at the beach, we have to put on sunscreen. and so I'm missing that moment to be sensitive to my child. Our voice and tone matter. And just, an interesting way to think of it is just, how would you want to be talked to if you're feeling dysregulated and upset? Then the other thing that research has focused on is the secure attachments with autism. The caregivers were resolved in their diagnosis. So they had a change in their thoughts and feelings. They moved on with their lives. They had a primary focus was on helping their child versus focused on the origin of why their child had autism. And they recognized the disability is permanent and part of a child's life. They also are seeing their child as having a range of characteristics, and they see their child more than the label. And like I shared, they stop looking for, they're not preoccupied with the search for the cause. So as we talked about, attachment is bidirectional, meaning the caregiver influences the child and the child influences the caregiver. And so you know, when you're working just as yourself or the professional, it's important to look at that whole system, not just one direction. So putting it together, research found that when a mother was sensitive and insightful and resolved, that they had 83% more likely to have secure attachments versus just being insightful or resolved. And the key link was having that sensitivity. So the parents that were just insightful and resolved weren't as securely attached as those that had that sensitive touch. And they also, I love this because they found that the current child's level of diagnosis or their level of functioning did not at all impact the research. So why does attachment matter? Not trying to, increase anyone's anxiety, and I do promise I'll give some key ways to connect with your child, is that, attachment shapes how we think and feel, remember and behave. It helps us, with regulating our emotions, feeling secure in the world, being able to experience joy. It greatly impacts our own attachment, with future generations. And as an adult, when we're exploring these attachment styles, I imagine some of us thought of our own attachment with our caregivers. And at least I did, right, when I was going through this training. And so we also know that children with autism struggle with emotional regulations, as I shared on that slide, and flexible thinking. And so having secure attachments really increases that, it helps lessen those symptoms so that children are able to be more regulated and exploring their world. And a study from the London School of Economics drew the conclusion that the most important childhood predictor of adult life satisfaction is the child's emotional health, and the least powerful predictor is the child's intellectual development. And so as a therapist mom, it confirms why we need to focus on our emotional resiliency, because that is more closely tied to life satisfaction. Again, I'm not going to necessarily delve into this. I'm trying to be mindful of the time, but secure attachment helps everything. You gain greater independence, better regulation of moment, your better coping skills, better social skills. And this is also true with autism. They found that those with secure attachments had more joint attention. They had more personal, seeking out to join in with play with other children or caregivers. And so they had increased speech and communication skills. So neurotypical and neurodiverse secure attachment helps. And so this slide really just talks about that, the relationship you're creating as your baby turns into a toddler, turns into, an adolescent, really is creating, that healthy relationship throughout life. And so sensitive parents allow the changing attachment to grow and stretch with the child's growing skills. And that's really important to know what your child's deficits and skills are, because the point is to know your child. And there might be times where we let our younger child have a little bit more freedom based on his developmental capabilities. And so you're really not comparing, to the kid down the street or what the other child in your office is doing. You're really just looking at that child and what their developmental needs are. So I want to be mindful of any trigger that this movie or this video could bring. It's about 7 minutes, and it does kind of tie in everything we talked about as far as attachment and Now that I'm learning more about the neurodiverse brain, I love showing different ways to learn. And this does a picture animation of what attachment looks like. And so the warning is just that this family loses the husband. And so if that is at all going to be activating for you, you have permission to mute. I think if cameras are off or whatever you need to do, and then, rejoin in 7 minutes and it should be over.
The attachment theory argues that a strong emotional and physical bond to one primary caregiver in our first years of life is critical to our development. If our bonding is strong and we are securely attached, then we feel safe to explore the world. We know that there is always that safe base which we can return to any time. If our bond is weak, we feel insecurely attached. We are afraid to leave or explore a rather scary-looking world because we are not sure if we can return. People who are securely attached are said to have greater trust, can connect to others, and as a result are more successful in life. Insecurely attached people tend to mistrust others, lack social skills, and have problems forming relationships. There is one type of secure attachment, and there are 3 types of insecure attachments: anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and anxious disorganized. In responses to distress, the first 3 react organized, while the last acts disorganized. To understand the theory better, let's look at Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who have 4 children: Luca, Anne, Joe, and Amy. The Smiths are lovely parents who cuddle, make frequent eye contact, speak warmly, and are always there for their kids. But one day, Mr. Smith falls very sick and dies. For Mrs. Smith, life now becomes very difficult. She spends all day working, while at the same time trying to care for her children. An impossible task. At 6 years of age, Luca's brain is for the most part developed, his character strong and his worldview shaped. The new situation does not affect him much. He knows there is still always Mum, his safe haven. He feels securely attached. Later, he turns into a trusting and optimistic young man. His self-image is positive. Anne, who is 3, has problems coping with the new lack of attention. To Anne, her mother now acts unpredictably. She is anxious about their relationship and as a result becomes clingy. To get her mum's attention, she has to raise her emotional state and scream. When her mum finally reacts with a predictable response, she herself acts ambivalent and doesn't show her true feelings. Later in life, others think Anne is unpredictable or moody. Her self-image is less positive. Her attachment style is anxious ambivalent. 2-year-old Joe spends his days with his uncle, who loves him, but thinks that a good education means being strict. If little Joe shows too much emotion or is too loud, his uncle gets angry and sometimes punitive. This scares Joe. He learns that to avoid fear, he has to avoid showing his feelings, also in other situations. As an adult, he continues this strategy and has problems entering relationships. His image of himself is rather negative. His attachment is anxious avoidant. Amy, who is just 1 year old, gets sent to a nursery. The staff there is poorly trained, overworked, and often very stressed. Some are outright abusive. Amy therefore becomes anxious of the very people she seeks security from, a conflict which totally disorganizes her ideas about love and safety. As she is experiencing fear without resolution, she tries to avoid all social situations. As an adult, she thinks of herself as unworthy of love. Her self-image is very negative. Her attachment is anxious disorganized. Our attachment is formed in the very first years of our lives, a time when we are too young to communicate our anxiety and as a result can experience high levels of stress. Then our adrenal gland, an organ sitting on top of our kidneys, produces the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol. The heart rate increases, the blood pressure goes up, and we become alert. If that happens frequently, it is called toxic stress. Toxic because it impairs the development of a child's brain and weakens the immune system. In embryos or at a very young age, toxic stress can even switch the expressions of genes, which can affect our health many decades later. By simulating a strange situation, we can assess an attachment style already by the age of 1. To do this, we let the child play with their mother for a few minutes inside a room. Then the child is left alone. The key moment is the child's reaction when her mother returns. Securely attached children first usually hug their mother, then can calm down and eventually get back to playing. Insecurely attached children can be ambivalent and avoidant. Some can't stop crying or refuse to continue playing. The long-term effects of our attachment in the early years are well documented. Using the theory, researchers at Minnesota University were able to predict already at age 3 if a child would drop out of high school with 77% accuracy. In another study, undergraduates at Harvard were asked to assess how close they felt to their parents. 35 years later, they were asked about their health. 91% of those who said they had a rather broken relationship with their mother were also diagnosed with health issues, including coronary artery disease, hypertension, and alcoholism. For those that had reported a warm relationship, the figure of poor health diagnosis was just 45%. But there is another reason why the early years deserve special attention. They are the starting place for subsequent behaviors. A kid that feels securely attached at age 2 can make friends at kindergarten. Their worldview gets reinforced with every interaction, and they develop optimism. As a result, they make good relationships at school, then at college, and later at work. Highly insecurely attached children can miss out on this opportunity. Psychologist John Bowlby, a pioneer in attachment theory, allegedly said, "What cannot be communicated to the mother cannot be communicated to the self." In other words, those who feel insecurely attached might not quite understand themselves. To get to know who they are and what they feel, they might have to go way back in time.
Okay, let's hopefully see if I can do this. Maybe I'll move all of it. Uh-oh, okay. All right, and I'm going to try to exit out of the PowerPoint so that we can, I can see the Zoom. Now I think I have to stop sharing. I don't know, Lakin, if there's questions or I can't really see.
I haven't got any questions in the chat box, but if you guys, at this point, if you want to unmute and ask the question or put them in the chat box, we're fine with that right now.
There we go, okay.
I guess I came up with my own question. Someone just come in.
Yeah, I just admitted her. Yes.
So I was curious if styles can be mixed at the same time. So can you experience multiple attachment styles, or can you shift throughout time with different coping strategies and kind of change those strategies?
Yeah. So that I'll get to a little bit more of that at the end, but the first 2 years are the most critical. Oh no, did I? Okay. I'm so good. Anxiety with technology. So the first 2 years are the most critical, but attachment repairs can happen at any point. I have worked with adults that had abusive attachment or abusive behavior and then disorganized attachment with their children. And when they work through their trauma, they're able to form secure attachments with their adult children. And so that absolutely, can happen. And then a child can have different attachment styles with different caregivers. And as I shared like at the beginning, I think Andrew and I had a secure attachment, and then we probably had more of an avoidant attachment in those middle parts, where I was kind of paired with the unpleasant and he didn't want to be with me. And I hate to admit it, but struggled just to be with him. I was dysregulated, and it was hard to be with him when he was dysregulated. So through just regulating myself and being more in tune with him, I do believe we've come back to a more secure attachment. And so that's, I think, the beauty. And again, I'll stress on this. So if anyone's anxiety is high about their own attachment style to their caregivers and their own attachment to their children, our brains are very resourceful. And so, yes, that can change and evolve. I think I'm going to try and go back down. I shouldn't have tried to get off of it. Right, no, from Corinne. There we go. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Hopefully everyone's regulated, and if not, so when I'm working with clients and I know that there's topics that are dysregulating, I encourage them to drink water, maybe stretch, or kind of feel their feet on the ground. And perhaps everyone had secure attachments and are securely attached to their children, but I know that there's a lot that can be brought up when we talk about attachments. If everyone's okay, there's no other questions.
I don't see anything coming in.
Okay. So the next section, I really want to spend time on ways to increase attachment, because I think we can always learn, and especially with our children with autism or neurodiversity, it is, it's always changing, and I think, it's important to stay current. So Daniel Siegel, he wrote The Whole Brain Child with, I think it's Tanya Bryson. I might be saying it wrong. I have it later on in the slide. But he says there's 4 S's to attachment. It's seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And, hold on. Went too quick. Okay, and so I'm going to butcher his name, but Schwarf, we're just going to go with that. He's a developmental psychologist at the Institute for Child Development at the University of Minnesota, and he's studied attachment for the last 40 years. And I love this because I know attachment parenting is like, taking the storm, and that this is a set of things that you have to do. And he really stresses that attachment is not a series of tricks. Attachment is a relationship in the service of baby's emotional regulation and exploration. It is a deep, abiding confidence a baby has in the availability and responsiveness of the caregiver. So again, it's that bi-directional. It's the caregiver being in tune and helping the child explore the world safely and being available for emotional connection. And then it's the baby's ability, to trust that caregiver's got it. And again, attachment can wax and wane, and it's never too late. I cannot stress that enough. It is never too late. It's really the quality of attachment and interaction, it's the quality of interaction that matters. And you can do all the things, but if you're not in tune, connected, or reading your infant, toddler, child, adolescent, true connection is not happening. And I do believe that's what was happening for us from the time of his diagnosis until the more information I got. And as a therapist mom, again, there's so many different ways to work with autism and help a child with autism. But for me, I'm really relationally based, if you haven't gotten that from this presentation. And so I really didn't feel like I knew how to help Andrew until I learned different ways like social thinking, or learning more about executive function or sensory needs. And the more I got information on that, the more my strength of my right brain and emotional brain was able to then help Andrew in this world and give him that comfort in a way that felt good to me. Forcing him to do a play, like a imaginative play, when his brain wasn't there, developmentally ready to do that, seemed torturous. And I regret that, I didn't have the knowledge then. And again, this is just my family. So that's what worked, for me and what I felt most comfortable doing. And it's interesting because over COVID, Andrew took off with his imaginative play, and I did nothing nothing other than just be curious about his world and enter it. And so that's not lost on me that when Andrew felt connected and safe, that other things like imaginative play and joint attention really started to take off, on top of years of services. So I don't want to deny if any of our providers or people that have worked with them are on here, they did a lot of work. So I do not have math or science smarts. And if I did, I would have been a neuroscientist. I love the brain. I love that we can study the brain. It is fascinating, and it really connects with attachment, and it connects with autism. And so one of the first areas of the brain that begins to develop in the second trimester is the right brain, so right over here. And that houses our feelings, visualization, imagination, and arts and rhythm, active listening. So it houses a lot of different areas. And the right brain, like I shared, is where our emotions and also where our social information is stored. And so the left brain uses more logic, has like memory. That would be probably where my math smarts is located. And the left brain doesn't really start to take off until year 2. So those first 2 years of a baby's life, they are very much right brain dominated. And from a caregiver's input, attachment really takes place from right brain to right brain. And so that is the part of the brain that uses intuition, feeling, empathy to attune to our infant is the right brain. And I want to just give an example of how, like when I say attachment is right brain to right brain, I had a moment today. So doing this whole training, I got to reread The Whole Brain Child, and I had read it when the kids were a lot younger, and I love to reread it now that we know what their brain is doing and what their emotional regulation is doing. And so I've been trying to be better because I found myself so often with my boys, they would have an emotional response and I would go into problem solving or logic. And so today, this morning, our youngest, Noah, we have a kitten, or evolving, he's becoming a cat, and he was rambunctious this morning, and Noah was chasing him around and picked him up, and the cat, scratched his eye. And I had just earlier told him to hey, leave Nat alone. He doesn't look like he wants to play. And Noah had an emotional reaction, and the cat hurt him. And my instinct, and I'll be honest, my instinct was to go, I told you not to play with the cat. And that would have been him having his right brain dominated with his feelings, and me coming in with my left brain and the logic, and also frustration and not a kind or sensitive tone. But because I was doing this training tonight, I took a deep breath, and all of that kind of went in my head in a millisecond. And I was able to connect right brain to right brain. And I said, oh, Noah, I'm so sorry, right? I'm still in my head going, I told you not to touch the cat, but what's coming out of my mouth, and I'm trying to be attuned and saying, I'm really sorry that Nat scratched you. Let me take a look. And so I oriented myself to that right brain and that emotional brain. And he was able to kind of calm down. And then I could go to the logic and say, hey, it's important that we read the cat's body language. And he did not look like he was going to be able to be picked up and cuddled. He was going crazy all morning. And the other interesting thing, again, why it's important to understand the autistic brain is because typically individuals are wired to be more right hemisphere dominated. So neurotypical, I guess, research has found that they're more right dominated, and autistic individuals have a less specialization. So their right and left brain are pretty much I think when they're talking about that, like the blood flow and activation and what gets, and so it's more symmetrical, which I thought was interesting. I thought that would make it more regulated, but it does not. And so there are differences in how the brain is structured and what's, kind of being activated. I use this all the time with my clients for them to understand, what part of the brain is being activated. And when you read The Whole Brain, if you haven't read it and plan to, when you read The Whole Brain Child, he does such an awesome job of just going through, again, not only the right and left parts of the brain, but also the different types of brain. And so the type of therapy I do as attachment-based and also EMDR is a bottom-up approach. Traditional therapies like CBT or maybe more behavioral things are going from the top-down approach. So bottom-up is going from like our body all the way up to the top part of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex. And so understanding which part of the brain are we talking to is so important. The brainstem, or like this is the most primitive, that does our digestion, our heart rate. It's like it's automatic. And so that part of our brain, we don't really even pay attention to unless it's not working. Then we have the limbic system, which is kind of right in here. And that is where the primal parts of us are. So our desires, fear, anger, trauma is housed in there. And so that is where it filters out threat. And I'll come back to that. But then the prefrontal cortex, it develops last, and that is where our thinking, learning, language, and our ability to inhibit behaviors or impulse, all of the executive function is housed in the front part of our brain. And that develops last. It also does not fully develop until age 25 in neurotypical individuals. So neurodiverse individuals, it's still growing several years after that. What I find so fascinating, and I still need to read another journal article I found, but the amygdala is the alarm center of our brain, and it's located in the limbic part of our brain. And in autistic brains, it starts an accelerated growth around 6 to 12 months. And so that I think is so interesting, that when we talk about dysregulation or maybe sensory concerns, if that is being flooded, so that's also similar with trauma, our amygdala is activated. And I always describe it as like, we want our amygdala to turn on when there's something that's threatening, but we want it to turn off when there's not a threat. And so trauma and also autism, that amygdala is very activated always. And it's and it even has like it's even larger than in a neurotypical brain. And so this really lets us know if we're not feeling safe. And if we're not feeling safe, we cannot be social. So if we're in our primitive brain, we're not connecting and being attuned to those around us. Because in order to be social, if you think about it from evolutionary standpoint, if a dinosaur is chasing you, you're not going to stop and chat with your neighbor. You're going to keep running or grab them and go and run away. And so you're not going to be able to be social. All right, so I hope this page is what eases any parent's guilt or anxiety. I know it eased mine, and I've been using it since I learned it with all my clients when they're feeling guilty. And so the 30% rule is that even with secure attachments, parents are only attuned perfectly 30% of the time. If you had asked me before I started doing more research on this, I would have thought it was the opposite, that like 70% of the time they're attuned and 30% they're not. So I definitely breathe, fresh breath of air and relax more to know that really we just need to be attuned 30% of the time. And what is important is that the baby develops that generalized trust that the caregiver will respond and meet their needs, and that when a mismatch happens, that there's a repair. And so that's where that apologizing or correcting that behavior. So like if there's times that, I normally try and ask Andrew, hey, can mommy give you a hug? And I normally wait for his response, but sometimes I go and give him a hug and he might stiffen. And so I sense that and I say, I'm sorry, bud, mom didn't, ask for your permission, or, mom was leaning in for a hug and I didn't read that you didn't want one. And so learning from your mistakes. And I think, I love this quote that children who are apologized to learn how to apologize. I think sometimes parents think, if I apologize, then I'm losing authority. But I think that you are gaining that connection. And when we have connection, our children are more likely to listen to us. And so, just knowing that goes a really long, long way. Shore, who specializes in attachment and bonding. I also liked this, that he, really stresses that the idea that a mother should never stress a baby is problematic, that insecure attachments do not come from inattention or missteps. It comes from failure to repair ruptures. And so stress is part of life. And I think that, in our household, we really focus on that we're human, we make mistakes, we apologize, that, we can still love each other even when we're angry. That's something that we often say, I love you, even though I'm really mad right now. And that, I'm just continually trying to be mindful of how to best be in tune with my children. So with autism, oh gosh, I love this one too. Sorry, you hear that a lot. Oftentimes you hear people say, oh, my child's high functioning, or, they're nonverbal, or all these things. And I really love this down here where it says, autism really is just a child with a bunch of different sliders. And so some may have more stimming, some may have more eye contact, some may have less. And that really knowing your child, because when you meet one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. And I fully believe that. So you want to look at the ways they communicate, how do they regulate, what are their sensory needs? I mean, that was huge for me to learn all of that. I have sensory needs of my own. And so it helped me just normalize what those needs are and better advocate. And then, what is your child interested in? I am not good with IT. I'm not good with tech things, but I try my hardest to listen and try to learn. And, I'm not lying. They know, if something breaks, not to come to mommy, because I will say mommy has no IT tech smarts. So you gotta wait for dad. And they know that, and that's okay, because my brain is different. And I've been joking with them because Andrew, for the longest time, didn't want to talk about feelings. And I say, but you know what mom's really good at? And he looks at me and I say feelings. Mommy's really, really good at feelings. So we can share that we have different interests, and it's okay. One of the other examples that I'd love to give is that, we are a huggy family. My extended family is very huggy, and we love giving kisses, and Andrew does not like that. And so my mom came up with a thing called elephant kisses, where you kind of place your hand on top of their head and you give a kiss. And so therefore, both needs are met, and Andrew has approved it. And it's a great way that we can, discuss we'd love to give kisses, but what feels comfortable for you? It has been found that caregivers who are more capable of understanding and accepting their child's emotions and autism characteristics appear to be sensitive in their interactions with their children. So understanding, again, there's such a negative language that we talk about with children with autism, that they're being defiant or they're manipulative. And one of the things that I noticed about Andrew, that it took me a long time, that he would elope and he would leave situations, because now I realize it was dysregulating and noisy and chaotic. And we were forcing him to stay in those environments and stay in that situation. And I was really denying that autonomy of what he was telling me. He was having sensory issues. He wasn't trying to be away from us or not do the group plan or, things like that. And so me having this awareness allows me to be attuned to minimizing that. Like if I know we're going to go a place that's noisy, we can have a space where he always knows, hey, you can go over here. Like if we're going to a party or family gathering, he knows he can find a bedroom that is his and he can go and regulate. And then I also can help him be more in tune with what's going on in his body. So when I start to see him walking away, I can just point that out and say, oh, I bet your body feels, like it needs to go regulate, or the noise probably got too loud. And so I'm helping him then connect with himself. I recommend everyone learning about interoception. Kelly Naylor is leading the charge. Interoception is called the eighth sense. So we typically know sight, sound, touch. There's also, the vestibular input and proprioception, which is body and space. Interoception is that ability to know what's going on internally. This is not just an autistic thing. This is an everyone thing. Kelly is quoted saying that in this podcast. This just was released and I have listened to it 3 times. I love it so much. Chloe is an autistic adult and she's trying to bring awareness into what this concept as well. And so how our bodies are feeling and what is it communicating is, self-regulation. So interoception is that body's ability to self-regulate. Autistic and neurodivergent people do have more difficulty understanding this inner experience, and Kelly and Chloe really do a good job describing why. That when our sensory world is so overwhelming, then that person has to kind of come out of their body to look for danger. And so then they have no more resources to really be paying attention to what's going on internally. And so attachment damage can happen when we don't presume competence and that an autistic individual is telling us what their body needs. So behavioral plans to stop stimming is telling your child, that they don't know how to regulate their body. And Kelly really celebrates stimming behavior versus trying to make someone look neurotypical when they're needing that to regulate. Anyone who knows me, at times I twirl my hair. And so that might be, something that's more common or not as, standing out as hand flapping, but it's my way to regulate, especially when I would be taking tests. Everyone would know Sarah would be twirling her hair. And it's important for us to be curious and explore what the child is telling us about their bodies so that we can intervene with sensitivity. Chloe, I still laugh when I think of her saying this, oftentimes, and well-meaning adults, I'm sure I have said this. I know, loving teachers or staff have said this to my children. Like when she asks for a brain break and they say, "You don't look like you need a break right now." And she goes, "Wait 3 minutes until I look like I need a brain break, and it's not going to go well for you, and it's not going to go well for me." And so, what they're really honing in on is that we often are really bad at listening to our autistic, children or adolescents or adults, and we need to get more curious and know that they are aware, and we have built in these things that really stifle that. And so I encourage everyone to listen to the Uniquely Human podcast in general, but especially episode 47 on, podcasts. This book, Co-Regulation Handbook, was fantastic. I love it. It talks about ways that we can regulate with our children, get them more engaged and connected with us. And so attachment theory is a theory of regulation. And regulation is that, like I shared with interoception, regulation is that ability to know what our body needs, provide this, and feel a sense of balance and calmness. Co-regulation is doing this alongside another person. And so we are doing this with our children, as well as, we're regulating ourselves, and then we're working to regulate our children. And dysregulation is just that inability to manage an emotional balance and maintain connection to others. So again, attachment and regulation go hand in hand. The more I can stay regulated as the caregiver, the more then I can help my children regulate themselves. 80% of co-regulation comes from modeling of regulation from parent or caregiver. So again, why it's so important for me to continually strive to be regulated, because 20% comes from teaching strategies. So teaching children to breathe when you are dysregulated is not as effective as you being regulated and them feeling that. I give this example because in that book, they give you really concrete strategies of how to engage your child based on their developmental need. And so one of these things I realized, we do this a lot is, and not all the time, so I really check myself on how my regulation is, but my boys love when I pull out the baking stuff. They are always front and center. They all have like different jobs that they like, and we have to negotiate that. And so, like doing this together, or them telling me what to do, and we're just kind of being, paired together. Now I do, like, there's a couple times over Christmas that I had to get a certain Christmas cookie done, and they would come in, and it was okay because we had those other moments where I could say, "Mommy really has to focus on this, and I have to do it quickly. I love when you help me. I'm going to do this." And it was okay if they felt disappointed, and I could acknowledge that and say, "I get it. You feel really disappointed right And then also just, I mean, we're very open. I'm very open in the house about how I'm trying to regulate. My boys know that if like, because our house is at times very chaotic, and they know that if mom's feeling really dysregulated, I will say, I got to go listen to music, or I've got to go take some breaths. I've got to go get myself regulated before I can come back. And so, you know, I will even say, mommy's got to go cool down for a minute and I will come back. And the times that I'm able to stay regulated, anytime my children are having meltdowns or dysregulation, it goes so much smoother. Those times that they're dysregulated and I become dysregulated is not pretty. We're not, you know, we're not perfect. And obviously I have my threshold and my bound, you know, my button that gets pushed. But the more I can strive to be regulated, the more connected I can be to them. So I have another video that I share with my trauma clients, but I also have been sharing it with adults that I work with autism, to show what happens when our nervous system is really dysregulated. And I love how it shows how it impacts connection with others. So just because there may not be like direct abuse for an autistic individual, their nervous system could still be keyed up. There might be bullying, the sensory world is overloaded. Things are just, if their brain is making it hard, then that can give a lot of stress. So just kind of keep that in mind, that lens. This is more of a trauma video, but I really use it and discuss that with my autistic individuals of how their brain and nervous system is feeling dysregulated.
Over half of us have a chronic disorder such as high blood pressure or autoimmune disease. Rates of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction are skyrocketing. Why? The roots of these issues and more can often be traced to trauma, adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, and ultimately, nervous system dysregulation. Meet your autonomic nervous system. Let's call it ANS. ANS takes care of a lot of your automatic functions, like your heartbeat, digestion, and body temperature. ANS also manages your survival and stress response, working to keep you alive when your life is in danger. ANS functions as our built-in detection system, constantly scanning our environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. As ANS scans the environment, it has 3 general responses or states. Safe. You feel calm, relaxed, and connected to those around you. Mobilized. When ANS detects danger, it sends a command and your heart rate and breathing increase, adrenaline and cortisol are released, and blood rushes to your muscles so you can handle the threat. This is our fight-flight response. Immobilized. When ANS detects that the danger is so great that you can't fight or run, it shuts you down. In this state, our heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature decrease, and pain-numbing endorphins are released. ANS does all of this automatically without us thinking about it. ANS doesn't just use these states for survival. It uses them to navigate through the world each day. When ANS functions well, it moves fluidly from one state to another, 1 minute mobilized and ready for action, and the next resting and recovering. ANS will often blend states together. When we play, ANS combines the mobilized and safe states. And when we are intimate with loved ones, it combines immobilized and safe states. When ANS can stay flexible and fluid like this, it helps us manage and become resilient to stress and negative events. We're able to bounce back and move on. Unfortunately, when we experience trauma and chronic stress, it can keep ANS from functioning in a healthy, regulated, and resilient way, and can keep us stuck in states of survival. A friendly get-together can become frightening. A simple meeting at work can become threatening. For those with a history of trauma and chronic stress, the ANS detection system often becomes faulty, constantly signaling danger even when we are safe. It's like ANS is an alarm system, constantly signaling fire even when there's no smoke and no flames. Consistently living in these survival states can be debilitating, and we often develop adaptive strategies like using drugs, alcohol, food, work, or sex in an attempt to bring regulation and temporary relief. Understanding how trauma impacts us is critically important. There is a whole spectrum of experiences that can be traumatizing and adversely impact ANS, like accidents, assaults, and natural disasters, which are often called shock traumas. There is also developmental or relational trauma, when we experience chronic adversity, abuse, neglect, and lack of safety while growing up. Many other experiences can be traumatizing, including chronic stress, medical procedures, and adverse community environments like poverty, discrimination, and violence. Additionally, new research in epigenetics shows us that trauma can get passed down genetically at least 3 generations. In the past, we've thought about trauma as events that happen to us. We now know that trauma is an experience, not an event. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. It's our response to the event rather than the event itself. Over 20 years ago, Kaiser and the CDC launched a groundbreaking study of over 17,000 patients that showed a direct link between adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and long-term health and wellness. In the study, 2/3 of participants reported at least one ACE. Over 20% reported 3 or more. When participants reported 4 or more ACEs, this corresponded to an increased chance for heart disease, cancer, drug abuse, and more. With 6 or more ACEs, life expectancy decreases by almost 20 years. We are learning that many physical and emotional symptoms may emerge from a chronically dysregulated ANS. When ANS gets stuck in survival states, our biology shifts its focus from the tasks that keep us healthy, happy, and thriving to surviving the immediate perceived threat. Many conditions and symptoms that are chronic and difficult to diagnose and treat can be attributed to a dysfunctional ANS. Our childhood experiences can also keep us from connecting with others. This is vitally important because as children, our #1 survival priority is to attach to caregivers. When the people responsible for our safety aren't safe, and we are living in chronic states of unsafety, ANS doesn't get wired right. The part of ANS that judges what is safe and what is not becomes faulty. If intimacy and connection were unsafe as a child, as adults, we'll often unconsciously reject attempts from friends and partners to connect. Even though intimacy and connection is what we want, ANS feels it's unsafe and won't allow it. Trauma compromises our ability to engage with others, replacing the need for connection with the need for protection. When there has been trauma, ANS can no longer differentiate between our unsafe past and our now safe present. ANS can't turn off the need to protect, even though we are now safe. So what can we do when ANS becomes dysregulated? How do we recover from trauma and develop a healthy, regulated, resilient nervous system? Fortunately, we can retrain ANS to feel safe again. This is best done with the help of others. Each one of us has an ANS, and our ANS is constantly communicating with and attuning to the states of others. We autonomically mirror the states of those around us. This is called co-regulating. We see it in herd behavior. If one animal senses danger, the entire group becomes more alert, increasing their chances of survival. We're exactly the same. When we're with others who are stressed, angry, or depressed, it makes us feel worse. When we're with others who are calm and happy, it makes us feel better. Connecting with others who are safe, attuned, and present is the best way to restore a healthy ANS. For those struggling to recover from the impacts of trauma, there is an emerging field of innovative clinical therapies that have been developed to reestablish safety and regulation to ANS. We're also learning that many of the activities we intuitively know make us feel better, like spending time in nature, practicing yoga, dancing, helping others, and more, can help ANS become more regulated and resilient. Healing from trauma and finding release from being stuck living in survival states comes as ANS becomes regulated, increases its capacity for resilience, and regains its flexibility. It's not about being calm all the time or mobilized all the time. It's about having a flexible and resilient nervous system that can accurately assess safety and danger and responds appropriately. We're truly resilient when we can fluidly move from one state to another. For those living with the impacts of trauma and chronic stress, becoming unstuck is like beginning a new life. For the rest of us, understanding how our nervous system states guide our behavior can help us become happier, healthier, and more empathetic human beings. Collectively, we have an epidemic of social issues.
Okay. So the takeaway is it's never too late, hopefully. Neuroplasticity is that our brains can grow and heal, always. I would not be able to do what I do for a living and have full belief in recovery from trauma. And I see it on a daily basis. I see our nervous systems resetting. I see our attachments growing when we heal whatever is going on. And like I shared, the more information I learned, the more I was able to better attach to my son. And so it just is never too late. I want to stress that. Studies show that that there is evidence that with relationally and attachment-based interventions, it can improve the parent-child synchrony and sensitivity of caregivers. And then that may lead to, I guess, like an improvement of the symptoms with autism, like we talked about, joint attention and self-regulation. Theraplay and floor time are ones that are a little bit more structured, guided by a therapist, and they have the parent involved, but there's more structure to engaging in play and attachment-based. Filial therapy is more more child-centered, where the child is leading the play and the therapist is helping the parents improve their attachments. And then family therapy in an outpatient setting would be just, going to a therapist with your child or the whole family and talking and just, I've utilized that a lot with adolescents or young adults. Anytime their parents can get involved, I love it, because I think that it just always improves the attachment and relationship. And then family-based therapy would be coming into your home or out into the community. And so they, again, are very attachment focused and interested in helping improve relationships. As I shared at the beginning, anyone who will take trainings with me, I am a big proponent of our own therapy. And Dan Siegel and Bryson, who wrote The Whole Brain Child, say one of the best ways to promote integration in our children is to become better integrated ourselves. And so without conscious intervention, attachment styles do tend to get passed through generations. As you saw in that last video, trauma gets passed generationally, attachment styles get passed generationally. And so it's so important to know what our attachment style was to our caregivers, and then how, to break that cycle is to heal those attachment wounds and focus on regulation and our own self-care. And so becoming a parent activates our own attachment wounds and style. I often get a lot of parents when their kids are in toddler or early elementary school, and their trauma and attachment, all of that is front and center. And so I just try and help them recognize that that is normal and it is okay, and that our brain is just being activated, and there are ways to heal that, and that will always, always, always improve our attachment with our children. And so research shows that it is not the actual attachment experience as a child that impacts how we attach to our children, but more as an adult. So if we had an insecure attachment as a child with our caregivers, but we've done that deep work, we've done those trauma repairs, and we look at that differently and it doesn't activate us, then we absolutely can form secure attachments with our children. The generational pass down of attachment styles is when we're not looking at it, we're not talking about it, and we're just I call it trauma mode. We just go through life in that trauma lens and trauma mode. And so really asking ourselves, are you regulated versus dysregulated? I know I shared, I felt very regulated in those first early years with Andrew, and then stress and chaos and feeling really ill-equipped sent my whole system into dysregulation. And so really focusing on that and doing things that help me feel grounded and connected. And that's, another thing, asking yourself, am I present? Am I grounded? Am I flooded with emotions? Do I need to check out? Now, remember, there's not one perfect parent. And so there are going to be times where you do check out or that you are dysregulated. I just wanted to give some more resources because I love to read and I love finding resources. So I just got my copy of the Brain Body Parenting, but I've heard this now recommended by 2 different professionals in the field, and so I cannot wait to read it. I love the 10 things every child with autism wishes you knew. And The Explosive Child is Ross Green is a great guru for or children that have a little bit more stuck thinking and easily frustrated. And then I haven't had a chance to read this, but it's on my bookshelf, Raising a Secure Child. So providers and school personnel, just kind of asking yourself, how can you help families? Families report a significant lack of support after the diagnosis. They feel lost. I can attest to that, not knowing where to go or where to get that emotional support. And I think that a lot of interventions really just focus on the child versus focusing on the family and the strengths of the family. And when the strengths of the family are ignored, and we're only focusing on the symptoms, the family really starts to kind of feel dysregulated and their mental health increases. And then it's really important not to write off, families involved. Like I shared, my adolescents, adults, I love when their parents or caregiver come into a session and we can, increase communication. That's the same, all of my son's providers have included me. His teachers are absolutely amazing at, asking for our input. And I just know that that has made a huge difference in, I think, the whole team atmosphere. So I just encourage, do you know your community resources? So if you're a mental health provider, do you know your speech and OT and school people, and vice versa? Our team consists of speech, OT, PT, chiropractors, massage therapists, obviously, and doctors. So, really having that community lens. I just wanted to share one last thing. I think we have enough time because then we'll have time for comments. But I do have a blog. I started this. I don't write nearly as much as I want to. Hopefully things will slow down. But this is a picture of me and Andrew. He loves his PJs and he typically did not like parties, but thinking this was his 7th birthday party, he suddenly asked for to have a party, but he wanted it to be a PJ party. And so I wrote a blog that talks about how I started to see this shift with Andrew and our relationship when I realized he was showing nurturance and kindness to me. So I used to get annoyed when I would come home from work or being out and Easy would fixate on telling me, "Mommy, go put on your PJs." For those not used to the autism language, fixate means a child will say something over and over and over again. Imagine coming home from a long day, wanting to connect with your child, and only hearing, "Mommy, go put on your PJs. Mommy, go put on your PJs. Mommy, go put on your PJs." All I could think was how I wanted to come home and talk to my son about his day. I had visions of sitting on his bed and asking him how his day was, hearing about all the things he learned or had trouble with, and snuggling together. Reality of what I was met with was repetitive statements telling me to go put on my PJs. The more I tried to push my agenda of talking to him, the more insistent and angrier he became that I was not listening. Now I have learned to not fight it. I come in, say hi, hear him tell me to go put on my PJs, and don't come into his room until I have complied. Part of raising a child with autism is challenging yourself to see things through their perspective. Because how could I ask him to do something I am unwilling to do myself? Upon reflecting on why he insists I put on my PJs, I realized this was his way of showing me love, care, and nurturance. His favorite thing in the entire world is wearing his PJs. This includes fleece-footed PJs in 90-degree weather. He also knows that if I'm not at work, I am also in sweatpants or my PJs. He has observed how much I despise jeans or dress pants. He recognizes my own love for comfy clothing. He wants me to be as comfortable as he is in our PJs. I could focus on the fact that we cannot have the conversation I would like to have about his day, but where would that get me? Instead, I can choose to focus on the fact that he recognizes my own love of being comfortable. His insistence on making sure I'm in my PJs before he will even entertain the thought of talking to me is showing me love and connection. It is a myth that those with autism do not observe others or do not care about others. Yes, they struggle with perspective taking, seeing someone else's point of view, but someone with autism also has the capability of connecting with their loved ones, nurturing their loved ones, and showing care the way they know how. I would be missing all of this if I only focused on the behavior or what we are not able to do in this point. So every time I come home from a long day, put on my PJs and go in and say hi to my son, I know he was in fact thinking and connecting with me. And it really is about perspective taking. So I have, my email address, our website. We have an autism resource page. We do need to update it. I think I found a couple other providers that are fantastic that I need to add to it. And then like I shared, I do have a blog that just kind of is roughly sharing about our journey. Nothing that, I've committed every resource to, but there are a couple of things that might be of value. And then I did just list my references for those that perhaps want to see, where all that information came from. So I'm going to, stop sharing. There we go. Okay, I did it. If Andrew was here, he would have been able to walk me through all of it.
So does anyone have any comments, questions, or just anything that would be relevant to this?
You all are quiet.
So I was thinking about this. I'm just curious, how does this work with teenagers when they're going through puberty? Does that typically, do most parents see a shift in attachment styles just because, hormones and all that craziness that happens at teenage years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Our teenage years are very similar to our toddler years. So they are wanting that independence and still needing that support. Just really trying to acknowledge that autonomy while also thinking of safety. Like you think of driving, they're going to, maybe dances, they're going to different friends' houses. And so you're trying to balance that. But it is so important that if we had that secure attachment, we can weather that, and that's where a lot of my work is with adolescents is, helping that communication. But yes, understanding the brain and understanding what's going on in the brain during those developmental periods is helpful, which is why I love the whole brain child. When you understand that, I guarantee the right hemisphere is activated even more, similar to toddlers when they're developing and hormones are going through. And so you can still have boundaries, you can still have, loving boundaries, but you also can acknowledge like, yeah, this is rough. I wish during my teen years, someone would have just acknowledged how hard that was to, to not feel regulated and to, have those hormonal surges. So, we plan to really start talking to our child, especially with autism, about puberty before it happens. We made that mistake when he lost his first tooth. So we try to anticipate all those things that could be dysregulating. And I just totally missed that, you lose your tooth and the tooth fairy comes and he lost his tooth and he was hiding it and he was so scared. And so for puberty, like I'm going to talk about it before any changes or anything starts to shift so that he knows. And we talk about our bodies and differences and, that's not something that we shy away from in our house. So so especially for our autistic children, we need to talk to them before it happens. Because it can be very scary and confusing. Especially
last year we did do a presentation last April on autism and puberty.
Oh my goodness, if you have that recorded, I'd love it.
Yes, it was a good one. So but yeah, just I think with parents and teenagers, that attachment typically shifts during that time frame. Now, do you typically see a trend where if it would shift from attachment style during teen years, it does shift back to the original foundation of where it was?
Yeah, that there's absolutely I think too that whenever parents kind of just weather that storm, our kids do circle back and we do want to be that space, even if they're pushing us away, that we just keep that line of communication open. Just again, similar to my youngest, oh my gosh, he was I'm gonna do it, mom, get away child, and he also was a daredevil, and so I'm letting him have that independence, but I'm knowing, right, there's gonna be danger. ahead. And so I can kind of balance that. And I think with our adolescents doing that same thing, that we don't have to tell them all the bad things and the fears, but okay, like we're kind of keeping that thought and just saying, hey, like, have you thought of, that this might happen? Or what happens if you go to a party? These are, you're just kind of problem solving and having ongoing conversations. That secure attachment, I think when you've built that frame, and our children naturally are going to want to spend less time with us when they become adolescents, that is developmentally okay. They're going to spend more time in their room. They're going to spend more time on their computers. It's okay to have a balance, right? Like have rules and boundaries, but just knowing that that doesn't mean that they don't love you and that they don't want you near them. So yes, like I do believe that it will shift back. And there are many times that I've called my parents, I'm sure all of us can attest to this, and go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. When I was a teenager, I did this, or I said this. And thank you for, not kicking me out of the house. Thanks for putting up with those years.
So we did get some comments. I appreciate you sharing all the information. Thanks, great presentation. Great content, very informative. Thanks, very insightful.
Thank you. I'm very passionate about this. So whenever Lincoln approached me, I was like, how about attachment and autism? Because I love blending those. So, and it is, I think we often, again, focus on behaviors versus focusing on that emotional component. And for me, that's what I know how to do best. And so I'm very thankful for, there's a lot of other people out there that are talking about it.
Right. Well, if no one has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.